Congress who is all too happy to be hidden while we're wasted to the bone. It is not food insecure, it's starvation, and it lurks in almost half the country's homes. So if you plan to lay down, hold your nose and vote for Joe, have the guts to admit that you chose to submit and that you decided lending your support to a pedophile must be a step towards hope. Then a vote for a man that spent his whole life implementing laws that dehumanized people of color is a vote against fascism.
There it is.
When you know damn well he's just a kinder, dumber face on the same white nationalism. So baby, throw away your scruples with the memories of your activism. Watch your weak resistance usher in a fucking cataclysm. Elect a bigot war pig and say you're gonna push him into pacifism.
I knew he's around.
That's some bootlicker Stockholm hostage liberal masochism.
If not, I'll just talk for a few minutes. And then you have his clip right where Marcia does that.
Baby, that's some fucking bootlicker Stockholm hostage liberal masochism. God, that's some fucking bootlicker Stockholm hostage liberal masochism. That's some fucking...
Where are you? Looking at Caleb. Okay, let me just the video music.
Legend says that Hercules swept Cerberus right off his feet and effortlessly set him down softly as a songbird. Atlas kept the world upon his back and every day wondered whether he could stand it any longer. And Tara Reid came out to say the man they tried to label the messiah of morality was really just another rapist. And I don't intend to hesitate when asked who was the stronger. Tara, like Assange, knew that carrying the truth would be the hardest labor. Tara knew that her assailant wasn't gonna make us any safer. And knew he's just the type of man to hand a decent foreign leader US printed walking papers. And knew he'd be relentless and aggressive in the war he'd wage upon her very character. That his attempts to weaken and degrade and embarrass her would be her only compensation. But I strongly doubt that anyone could ever have foreseen the stream of hate that came from quote-unquote progressives and the self-styled titans of survivor advocation. So if you really think there's something to be gained out of sharing your pain with the world, you are sorely mistaken. The Biden team just drug their feet addressing Tara's allegations. Until they had a decent list of smears, then they aired them out on every station. And it turns out no one wants to hear the truth of who they praised as being worthy of such bloated liberal celebration. That no one wants to really know the person they've so valiantly defended, even when it meant they had to gloat and shit all over someone braver than they'd be if given the occasion. Now cue the faceless comment squad invasion. Cue those fuckers crawling out the woodwork to come analyze the way you wore your hair and what you wear. Like your appearance waives your rights, or that somehow you're the reason for your situation. Somehow they've decided you should bear responsibility for what such monstrous men insist on doing. Like your appearance waives your rights, or that somehow they're deluded by the empty, hypocritical, and useless fucking platitudes that bastard keeps on spewing. I think it's very telling that the best of their excuses when they try to come and justify our president's abuses is a hearty butt Trump. In which case I'll remind you that you never saw the news attempt to sell us Donald Trump like he was morally upstanding or a decent human. But when Joe says something bigoted or ogles someone's little kid, CNN says, isn't this refreshing? Biden's like a mix of JFK and FDR with all the finer parts of Harry Truman. Christ, I know that they don't think that we're the brightest, but at least pretend we got a couple lumens. Ask yourself if you have ever questioned what they fed you, or do you just shut your eyes and then consume it? And now ask yourself if you ate every one of Biden's lies under guise of harm reduction and the promise of a slight improvement. And now imagine long ago that Biden chose to show you who he really was by traumatizing you for his amusement. Now imagine that you watched him touch a Bible with those filthy hands, and then assume the power of the highest seat in all the land, of knowing your attacker wields a global coalition born of 3-letter agencies who'll make a life's mission out of trying to discredit you through lies, damn lies, and collusion. Big tech is never gonna separate from our surveillance state. Fuck's sakes, they're just a breath away from total fusion. So there will come a time where even if you see the light, your voice will never reach the sky through all the bots and all the noise pollution. So trust us when we tell you that the masking of abuses is perhaps this country's oldest institution. And I know nothing nobler than facing it in honor of the truth when you know that the people holding power have been neutralizing truth since there was wet ink on the Constitution. So know that Tara's truth is something crucial to the movement. And if you see yourself a partner to the revolution, help this country see through all the baseless propaganda through the crux of Joe's illusions. And recognize that Tara Reid gave everything she had so she could tell us what the truth is. Recognize the decent thing to do when someone bears their soul and shows their bruises is not to ask for context or offer up your own solutions. Your job is just to listen with an honest mind and put yourself on Tara's side a moment so you understand the path she chooses. That there is no instant fame worth the dragging of your name. And if that's what you think, you've a lot to learn about the kind of facts the mob can handle and the kind that it refuses. You've a lot to learn about the news and all its many uses. Guess you've yet to learn the truth the news will serve as fruit from which they've squeezed out all the juices. And we all eat the husk and just pretend it's full of nutrients and isn't really useless. But the jaws of our ability to yield accountability are absolutely toothless. So don't you kid yourself that any lips are being loosened. They won't ever tell us where the bodies are or show us where the proof is. It's on you to recognize the lechery our president so regularly oozes. It's on you to muster up some honesty and ask yourself how Biden won your trust, but it's America that loses. Open up your eyes and learn to recognize the bruises. Open up your eyes and learn to recognize the bruises.
You know, sir, I like you much better with my glasses off.
I guess I was born with the curse of foresight. Cause I knew Joe was only gonna represent the war side. And that said, I just came to fight. You could keep the or flight. Save the surprise and the gasp when the shadow of the fascists have cast is on your doorstep in the glow of your porch light. Save the surprise when the grid goes down and we go underground to lick wounds in the gloom of a torchlight. While up in the sky, a blimp glides by with a sign like New Year's 2022. Brought to you jointly by Pfizer and Coors Light. While the centrists observe from a comfortable courtside, right in the thick of the action behind a partition. We're in a morbid position, a plague of evictions, born a comorbid condition of the cancer of wealth. I fantasize that I cancel myself, hands on your head, throw your best laid plans in the well. There are no more answers, questions go back on the shelf. All Joe's donors, a quick show of hands. How many of you sub to the Lockheed Martin OnlyFans? How many are loyalist patrons for the Raytheon Patreon? Occupy Iraq and send $1 million off into the great beyond. Cool yourself with the safety on. True to yourself in as much as you dutifully spew out a mucus of QAnon. You can't convince me the Capitol wasn't surrendered with every intention of digging us deeper down into the treacherous webbing of censorship, ebbing your speech and dissension so you can't hold Biden accountable. Not in his mentions and not in the streets. No to the end that Joe will defend the elite. Joe won't embarrass McConnell, but Joe's not embarrassed if all of your children are hungry and weak. Too hungry to speak. Too hungry to stand, they just lie at his feet.
Joe is fresh out of empathy, fresh out of policy, but he'd love to know, what was your favorite ice cream flavor to eat? Back when you used to eat. I guess the road isn't rocky for people who thought we were free. They'll believe what they read, and Joe's here to lull them to sleep. Counting us down by the dozens, the culling of gullible sheep, led to the slaughter by media, tyrants and government thieves. These are the leeches that stubbornly suck where there's nothing to bleed. These are the tumors that force us to crawl on our knees. This is the home of the brave. This is the land of the free. One was foreclosed in 08. One was condemned in 16. This is the home of the brave. This is the land of the free. One was foreclosed in 08. One was condemned in 16. This is the home of the brave. This is the land of the free. One was foreclosed in 08. One was condemned in 16. This is the home of the brave. This is the land of the free. One was foreclosed in 08. One was condemned in 16. This is the home of the brave. This is the land of the free. One was foreclosed in 08. One was condemned in 16. This is the home of the brave. This is the land of the free. One was foreclosed in 08. One was condemned in 16. This is the home of the brave. This is the land of the free. One was foreclosed in 08. One was condemned in 16. This is the home of the brave. This is the land of the free. One was foreclosed in 08. One was condemned in 16. This is the home of the brave. This is the land of the free. March of Dimes. Family fun run cancer bonanza. Front page of Apartheid Times. All of the charm of a car bomb. Arms wide open, taking no targets alive. Dark was the night, save for a red glow painting the sky in a sickening light. Like a scene out of hell or a day in an utterly alien life. When the fire runs wild. These are the years where the wild is more your daily drive. To wrestle the truth of extinction from out of the jaws of your pride. So open them wide, now is the time, there's nothing to fight. Blasted or sworn to defy, the end is the same and we're inches away from the line. So abandon your ego to die, the bed that we made is where we go to die. But never was passing in one's own sleep such a hideous sight. Such a storm of convulsion and bile expulsion from out of our mouths and our eyes. But these are the rights they implored us to exercise, with our signature forged and our hands all tied. And with eye contact and a senator's smile, they thank you for saving democracy right as they tighten the binds. Right when they're joining your chain to your neighbors, leading you out in a line. Call it the March of Dimes. One more charity parody. Hold back grants while we dance for the president's salary. Funding the bunkers where all of the wealthy will cower to witness our steepest decline. To err is a trait so inherently human. And to hoard enough wealth that you peacefully sleep when those humans are burning alive is truly divine. If divinity really means withered and fully decaying inside, you could live with yourself till you run out of wine and ring for a drone off a prime, skim a little off at the top of the March of Dimes. Sign of our system of capital, head to the sky with a hideous cry that mimics the suffering families out on the street that have built a career out of passing by, who were part of the great design. Part of a citizen base with its fate resigned. Part of a two-party system where both of the goals align. And the end result is more housing crisis than the plot device of 2009. Capitalism demanded a sacrifice. So I walk to the square, hand them my son, and they hand me the dice. I roll for his life. To an equal extent, you could say I was rolling for mine. I'd called any favor, I paid any bribe. But it's all up to me for the roll, so I close my eyes. And the sound of the crowd is the same for a 1 or a 5. Two equal outcomes playing as though they're on opposite sides. And I know in my heart that on 4 out of 6.
Hey everyone! This is Tara Reid. You're with the Politics of Survival. How are you tonight? You just saw me a few hours ago and I'm glad you came back. because I have a really cool guest. And he is a political analyst. He's a journalist. He's extraordinary. His name is Caleb Maupin. Here he is. Hi, Caleb.
Hi, how are you?
Well, it's late your time. Thanks for staying up.
Sure thing.
Yeah. Tuesday night, why not, right?
Yeah, it's been an interesting day, and why not engage, have a late night chat with a good friend of mine. So there you go.
Very good. Well, you know what, Caleb? I saw today. Actually, I saw you on RT, which is hard for people, and we got a little clip of you here because I wanted to remind everyone what you used to do for RT America. Like we used to see you quite often. So, hey, Reef, do you have that clip by chance? All right, we're going to play a clip of Caleb Maupin on the job today in a very big event that just happened in New York City. Caleb, do you want to set it up?
Oh, sure. Well, there was a shooting in the subway this morning at around 8:30 a.m. And so I rushed to the scene to report on it live for RT International. So I guess we'll talk about it after we show the clip.
Brand new taxes, starving all the billionaires and neutering their Visa Maxes.
What are the police saying about the
Topple Congress off their axis. Mobilize the homeless, give them axes, call it praxis. Chop a couple limbs off the legislative branches. We'll show you the difference between air as a human right and guaranteed oxygen access. Octogenarians who barely know what day it is are calling countless citizens while sitting on a dais made of ignorance that was built on the graves of the slaves made to labor for its self-declared significance. And all to build a Congress full of millionaires who make their fortunes insider trading while they shit on all the indigent. So I got a bone to pick with our leaders, and I'll start with the ligaments. Pick right through the muscle, dig the marrow out, and serve it to the unhoused millions living in their minivans or watching their belongings get evicted from their tenement. I have a dream where we breach the walls of Congress and just let them in. And what happens next will survive in only text, cause there won't be any evidence. There will only be that heavy kind of feeling that pervades a space where there has been a reckoning and you can feel its remnants. Let any man who enters seeking power know that those who came before him suffocated on their eminence. That there once was a seal on the wall, but we quartered it and scattered all the pieces that it might prevent its semblance. And so we end the great experiment.
Pouring out of the subway car, the individuals who were hit, blood on the ground, just a horrendous scene that happened at the subway station. Now, the shooter is still at large. They haven't apprehended him yet, and at this point, you can hear the police helicopters, that are above. You can also hear and see around me just all the police vehicles that are on the scene, and they're trying to figure out where this individual is. They're trying to apprehend him. Now, we're waiting to hear from the mayor. The mayor of New York City apparently has tested positive for COVID-19, so he's following the updates from inside of Gracie Mansion, the mayor's mansion here in New York City. The local police are on the scene. Questions about motive are being raised. One question that's being raised is this potentially some kind of act of terrorism? Is this an individual who maybe had been recruited to ISIS or some kind of terrorist group on the internet? Was this an act of racial hatred? This is a neighborhood with a lot of Latino folks, Puerto Rican Americans, as well as a lot of Asian Americans. And so people are wondering about the motive of this shooter. Also, questions are being raised about gun control because New York City has some of the strictest gun laws of any place in the country. New York City is notorious for its gun laws. You can't even have a hunting rifle without a permit. For a long time, the NYPD had a policy of stop and frisk where they were patting people down randomly to search for firearms. If you get caught with a gun here in New York City, which you are not permitted to have, you go to jail for many years. It's a very, very strict gun control zone. But those gun laws didn't seem to prevent this incident from happening. Despite the fact we have very strict gun laws here in New York City, this individual got their gun. From what we can tell, they got their gun. Not only did they have their gun, but they also had smoke bombs, and they managed to get into the subway, set off the smoke bombs, start shooting, injure 13 people with their gunshots. it's quite a horrendous incident. A lot of people are in shock. This happened at rush hour when the subways are very, very crowded. A lot of people were on their way to work, school kids on their way to school. I mean, it's a lot of people are just horrified by this incident and what happened, and asking questions about how this could have happened and what could have gone wrong with the city's security apparatus to allow it to take place. So a lot of questions are being asked. People are seeing this as almost a test of the new mayor and his relationship with the police department. The previous mayor, Bill de Blasio, was someone who was aligned with defund the police and you know, in some of the protests. And Eric Adams is himself a former police officer that's the current mayor of New York City. He seemed to have a better relationship with the police department. Federal agencies are on the scene as well. At this point, we'll be waiting to hear from the police department about what's going on. If this suspect is still at large, you can expect there's going to be what they call a manhunt, where they're going to scour the city for this guy and find him and make sure that he's taken off the street and taken to jail to face charges. You know, that's kind of the situation here. The question is, will a bounty be placed on the individual perhaps? Will there be a reward for anyone who can turn him in? One thing that people are pointing out is that anyone who was perhaps a friend or a relative of this shooter and knew he was going to do something like this and didn't report him is also in various serious criminal liability. I mean, if this person is someone's relative or friend and he was telling people he was going to do something like this, he was making plans and they didn't turn him in, they themselves are also criminally liable. That's kind of the situation here in New York City. The whole area is on lockdown. The subways are shut down in this part of Brooklyn. This is Sunset Park, Brooklyn. 36th Street and 4th Avenue is the subway station where the smoke you know, came out of the subway, and then the individual you know, fled the scene after shooting, where those horrendous images that are filling social media have.
Thank you. So Caleb, that was intense. You were on live there for a while and a while longer after that. So can you tell everybody about what happened from your version? You said you had a lot to say about this one.
Well, no, I mean, it's just, I think the whole world saw what happened. If you turned on the news today, especially in the United States, you saw what happened and more details are surfacing. But I guess what hit home about that is that was not very far from where I live. And that's the subway station I used to take. You know, I used to change trains there every day when I was on my way to work at RT America. My office was in Manhattan, and I would get on the train and then change at that 36th Street and 4th Avenue Sunset Park subway station. And that's where I would get on the train. And my wife also, you know, she would go to work, you know, and that was the same, you know, same thing. Well, neither of us, I was working from home today and my wife was not working today. And so I guess we were quite lucky that this happened today and not a month ago, because there's a chance we could have been in the middle of it. It's very terrifying to think about. I mean, it's utterly terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of
just going to work and boom, somebody just, yeah. And that was odd that he did a smoke bomb right before the smoke bombs. Yeah.
Yeah, what was that about? And, you know, this individual was wearing a gas mask. He was kind of posing like he might be a transit worker with his orange vest on. It's just utterly disturbing. And I mean, I tell people here in the United States, we have a society that's highly conducive to insanity. And especially since the pandemic, a lot of people have been very, very isolated, you know, and that, you know, we've had this wave of mass shootings. I've often made the analogy that, you know, the serial killer. Right. You know, we don't have that very much anymore. It's not reported because they don't report on good news, but we don't have very many serial killers anymore. You know, the whole, you know, guy who cuts up women in a sexual way doesn't happen that much anymore. It happens occasionally, but very rarely. But that had never happened before until 1888, until you had Jack the Ripper in London. Right. And it was a very bizarre form of criminality. People had never seen this before. This wealthy man was hiring prostitutes, cutting them into pieces. And what was going on there? Well, people said it was related to the change in social relations. The fact that it started in Britain, it was in Britain in 1888. And then after you had Jack the Ripper, you had all kinds of people writing letters to the, you know, the London Times trying to claim that they were Jack the Ripper. So then you had actual Jack the Ripper, whoever he was, sending body parts to the London Times, trying to prove that it was him who actually, you know, he was the real one, because so many people were trying to take credit for his crimes. And it was just this bizarre form of criminality. And the whole world was like, who is this guy in London? And then, of course, that continued for decades and decades, you know, with you know, Ted Bundy and all of that. And now, Now, in the last 2 decades, this kind of insanity has tapered off, but it's being replaced with mass shooters. We didn't used to have mass shooters. People have had guns for a long time, people have had automatic weapons and all of that. But it's really, in the late 90s, we started seeing a rise of mass shootings of these people. It was, high school kids going to school and shooting their classmates and shooting their teachers. And you have to ask yourself, if people look at 1888 and how this bizarre form of criminality that had never really been seen before in the world was arising, you can link it to changes that were going on in British culture, right? The rise of imperialism, the militarization of everyday life, the weird Victorian sexual repression that people were experiencing. Also, the kind of the culture there that was very punitive and was emphasizing violence, etc. So there was something in the culture that had changed that gave rise to that kind of insanity. And it's something in our culture that has, in some way or other, not, has gotten addressed because we don't have it. But now there's something in our culture that has given rise to this mass form of insanity that we're seeing over and over of mass shooters. And what is it? What is it that gives rise to mass shooters, right? We know a lot of them are influenced by white supremacist ideology. That's a common sign, these shooters. Now, this individual was African American, so it's hard to think he would be influenced by white supremacism, but never say never, right? I guess there was a Native American shooter maybe 10, 20 years ago who was Native American, but was also calling himself a white supremacist, which is very bizarre. But I guess we just have to ask ourselves, what is it about our culture that gives rise to this tendency of mass shootings? And of course, the Jack the Ripper thing, it started in Britain, but then, we had it in the United States, it was in Eastern Europe and elsewhere. And we've seen this kind of mass insanity has started to spread. It did start in the United States with the Columbine shooting and all of that. But even in China, they had these knife attacks where children bring knives to school and just start stabbing people. They can't get guns or whatever. So they just, they have mass stabbings at schools. That's happened in China a few years ago. So, it seems to be spreading to different parts of the world, right? We had Anders Breivik in the shooting in Britain. So this kind of criminality, this mass shooting insanity, seems to be the new form of criminality. And I would argue that it has something to do with our culture, much like Jack the Ripper, you could argue. And that was kind of rooted in Anglo British imperialism, militarism, colonialism. I would argue that something about the breakdown of our society, something about the culture we have now, maybe it's video games, there's many other factors, people can look into it. There's some people have speculated about these medications, right? That if somebody is depressed, they put them on antidepressants, which is common, and antidepressants actually help a lot of people. But for a certain type of person who might be suicidal, it gives them kind of a rush where instead of being suicidal, they suddenly want to go out with a bang and do something horrendous, right? And it can have that effect, and that could be a way that perhaps these psych meds backfire. That's one theory I've heard floated. Now, obviously, I'm not a psychiatrist. I have no way of concluding that that's what it's about. But there's something in our culture that I would argue is giving rise to mass shootings, and we ought to figure out what it is and try to put a stop to it.
I would add to that. I think it's the way our media in general. Well, look at what we're doing right now with Russia and Putin dehumanizing and demonizing, and the way our media just dehumanizes people across the world. And I think Western media is really part of it, part of that sickness, and part of the mass psychosis almost.
Right. And it's always men. We have not yet seen a female mass shooter, I don't think. Have we, to your knowledge? I think part of that is that, if you watch American mainstream media, kind of the way that a male proves that he's valuable is with his ability to carry out violence. There's all these shoot 'em up movies and video games and such. And that a lot of young men, because of lack of economic opportunity, the inability to get out on their own and start, get a job, they feel almost stripped of their masculinity. They feel that on some level, society hasn't enabled them to go get married and start a family and be a father or whatever. Society has just kind of rendered them and so they feel like maybe this is a way to prove their manhood, to prove that they are real men, right? Like they see on TV or like they see in video games. And that's very disturbing to think about. Some people talk about that, about how young men in the United States, they are in a little bit of a crisis. And that's why figures like Jordan Peterson are so popular, right? Is that what does it mean to be a man, as gender roles are being kind of largely reimagined and some of the traditional patriarchal stuff has been broken down, and rightly so, right? Domestic violence is an awful thing and et cetera. But as men are confused about what it means to be a man, and they've been given this message their whole life about what masculinity means, now society is giving them a different message, plus their ability to just have that kind of role economically, to be a father figure, to be a breadwinner, to be, I mean, that has been taken away, and we got I mean, that could have something to do with it as well. So we ultimately will have to wait until the details emerge about who this shooter is, what his motivations were. At this point, they're not considering it an act of terrorism. Some had speculated maybe this was somebody who joined ISIS on the internet. Maybe this was somebody who, who was motivated by racial hatred, because this is a largely, that particular area, that subway stop. I see, there's a lot of like stickers on telephone poles in Spanish, because it's a largely Puerto Rican neighborhood, and a lot of Chinese folks also. A lot of Chinese folks get on the subway. They work in Chinatown, but they get on the subway there to go there. So a lot of Chinese folks and a lot of Puerto Rican folks. So maybe it was an ethnic hate crime of some type, because there is, bigotry against those groups. But we really don't know. And the fact that they're not calling it terrorism now probably means they don't, they're not seeing ISIS take credit for it. They're not seeing a manifesto on the internet. So it's really tragic. What's also particularly disturbing is usually in these instances, the shooter is either apprehended at the scene or killed. And this is an instance where the shooter got away, and I believe is still at large, if I believe correctly.
Really? I haven't seen any of the updates, so I don't know.
Yeah. So, I mean, this shooter, not only did they, not only did they not get, killed on the scene, they actually seem to have gotten away. Now, I think there's a very good chance they will be caught. Every minute of New York City is monitored. When this person got on the subway, when they went through the turnstile, there's video of that. So they're going to know what this person looks like immediately. And I'm sure they'll catch them. I mean, it's with the mass surveillance state we've got now, this person really doesn't have a chance of getting away with it, I don't think. So there you go.
Well, I'm glad that you were able to do that. I'm glad, safely. And I'm also glad that you were able to be on air again, especially since RT, America shut down. So it's good to see you doing,
thank you.
Like a big segment like that, and see you do journalism and everything. So, and how is that going? I saw you did a couple op-eds, so you're doing some writing, and that's going well.
Sure. We're just doing the best we can. I am an anti-imperialist. I am all about exposing the crimes and challenging the lies of the power structure when it comes to Ukraine, when it comes to Latin America, when it comes to our crumbling economy in the USA and the emerging low-wage police state. I'm not going to stop. They can make it harder for me to do the work that I do, and they've certainly done that. But I'm going to keep going, and you're going to do the same, I know. So, there you go.
Yeah. Well, and I noted that they still have the Russian state affiliated under your personal Twitter account. And they just did that to George Galloway. I couldn't believe that either. So is Twitter, have you complained, and has Twitter responded at all about that?
I don't know what channel I would complain. They never gave me an option. They never told me they were doing this. I never even received an email informing me. It just happened one day. It was like 10:30 in the morning. Boom, your Russian state affiliated media. And I know other former RT America employees. Rachel Blevins has the tag. Manila Chan has the tag. And it's like a scarlet letter. It's just a way to say, don't listen to anything this person ever says. That's really what it's there to say. I mean, that's all they're trying to do. And if anything, it discredits Twitter, because I don't see U.S. state affiliated media being put out there. Exactly. What I think is interesting is, I've known about George Galloway for years, right? I've been a fan of George Galloway. I was watching him on the internet when I was living in Cleveland. He came to Cleveland to give a speech about Palestine, and I think 2008 or 2009. And I piled into this room with it was like thousands of Arab Americans were there to see George Galloway and cheer for him and his role in supporting Palestine. He had just done, been on a delegation to Gaza and delivered humanitarian aid in violation of Israel's wishes. And I've known about George Galloway for years, but I've noticed that some of these pro-imperialist folks who are all about trying to tear down and smear those of us who work at RT, they've gone after you, they've gone after me. They're just learning who he is, showing that they don't know anything about politics. They're just kind of paid shills, right? I mean, he is a legend in British politics. Right now,
he really fights for the working people, and then he founded the Workers' Party. Yeah.
And I mean, when he first got into Parliament, he was kind of a darling of the media. He had blonde hair, and they called him Gorgeous George. And he's appeared on like reality TV shows, and I mean, he's a legend, right? And he was in the Labour Party. He was known as like the left-wing voice of the Labour Party, and then Tony Blair kicked him out for opposing the Iraq War. And then he got back into Parliament he started his own party. It was first called the Respect Party. that he started, and he actually won. He was in parliament, the one member for the Respect Party, the Respect Coalition of Muslims and labor unionists and socialists and all kinds of people. And now he runs the Workers' Party along with my good friend Jyoti Brar and others. I mean, he's a legend. He's really a legend. And the fact that these people only know about him because he's been on RT and because they've been assigned to attack people on RT shows they know nothing about politics. And it's really great self-exposure. I mean, it's like, how can you not know who George Galloway is? I mean, if you know anything about socialism in Britain, that name immediately comes up. And to be fair, he's been quite consistent. You know, one thing about him is he is, you know, a religious man. And he has always been, you know, not a supporter of abortion. And he's always made that clear, you know, and that's kind of an interesting position for him to take because he was in the Labor Party, a more liberal party, but he always said, look, my faith, I don't believe in abortion. And he personally doesn't drink alcohol, right? I mean, and he always makes that clear. And so, you know, the press, they've always tried to play up, is he a Muslim? And they tried to accuse him of being a Muslim. And he always says, no, you know, my faith is my faith. I have my own beliefs. I was raised, you know, as a Protestant. I'm from Scotland. And I mean, he's just a dynamic figure, and being able to work with him now. I mean, I never thought in a million years I would work with him. I thought, you know, this is somebody I'll admire from a distance. You know, I'll come see them when they speak in the United States. I'll know British socialists. And now the fact that he was my colleague, I met him, I got to sit down with him in Britain, and I've been on his program before. It's such an honor, you know, it's really great. And I mean, I'm really happy about the opportunities that working in Russian media has given me. I mean, we need RT. We really need RT because, you know, I mean, people don't realize how much of a boost it's been to dissident and anti-imperialist voices in the United States.
There's, you know, I was on his show not too long before, you know, everything got censored, and he really is. He's so generous and kind, very, very good person, you know, with his time and with his ideas. And, you know, the fact that he gives so much vigor and energy to his political activism at a time in his life when he could just like say, okay, forget it. I'm going to walk around with my, you know, he has a young family and, you know, just be in the world. Right. But he's chosen to really dedicate and fight for workers and stand up and say things that other British legislators are not saying.
Yeah. And he spoke up. One of the only anti-war,
you know, over there voices.
And he was against the European Union. He supported Brexit. He said, look, the European Union is bad for the British working class. And even though, you know, I know a lot of the people who are supporting Brexit are doing it for not so good reasons or whatever, I don't support the European Union. And he's not afraid to take some unprincipled stands because he's so opposed to imperialism. You know, he had a very close relationship and went out of his way to stand up against the execution of Bhutto, who was the socialist prime minister of Pakistan, you know, and he went out of his way and led this international campaign to try and stop that execution. There are many Pakistanis that really admire him for taking that stand because, again, this is a leader of a third world country in Pakistan who was aligned with China and was a communist and you know, and was ultimately executed by the new regime that came into power. And, you know, that was not a popular stand to take, but he stood up for Bhutto. And he went to Iraq, you know, in the lead up to the U.S. invasion of Iraq and actually interviewed Saddam Hussein and gave Saddam Hussein a platform to tell his side of the story. That was very bold as well.
Yeah. Yeah, really powerful. And I mean, and you think about all the talent, the journalistic talent that's with RT, you know, Chris Hedges, you know, comes to mind, and Lee Camp, you just saw my show earlier. And of course, you know, and you all that were here in RT America, Farron and I think, and Farron and Rachel, and I forget.
Great folks.
Yeah. So hundreds of people. So, but you're good that you're still with RT International, and you can find RT for those who are watching, having trouble finding it. It's on Odyssey and Rumble. Anywhere else, Caleb?
I would recommend going to RT.com and clicking live. That's how I watch it. I go to RT.com, I click live, and then it has like the options. You can watch on Rumble, you can watch on Odyssey, you can watch it just from the website. And that's how I know I'll always be able to find it. If I go to RT.com and hit live, that's how I find it. So there you go.
Okay, there you have it. So as far as if people want to find you and find your work, where can they go?
Oh, I'm on YouTube, Caleb Maupin on YouTube, Caleb Maupin TV. You know, you can always go to my website, calebmaupin.com. And I work with the Center for Political Innovation, CPI. That's cpiusa.org. That's the think tank I've been involved with. We've had some great conferences so far. We're looking to do that again soon, hopefully.
Yeah, could you talk to us a little bit more about that? I got to speak at one of the conferences remotely. It was in Austin, Texas. But could you tell everyone, you know, a little bit more about how you got involved with it and where that started?
Well, sure. I'm someone who comes out of activism. For many years, I worked for the former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark, and I worked at the International Action Center, which was an activist group that he started that was involved with opposing wars and fighting for economic justice. Ramsey Clark is just a dynamic individual. He was the U.S. Attorney General under Lyndon Johnson. And he took some very bold moves. He let a lot of people out of federal prison. And he basically stood up to J. Edgar Hoover, blocked J. Edgar Hoover from wiretapping a lot of Black Panthers and such. And Richard Nixon said, the first thing I will do when I get elected is I'm going to fire Ramsey Clark. And he did it. He fired Ramsey Clark as U.S. Attorney General. So Ramsey Clark then went to North Vietnam and met with the Vietnamese people, and became an outspoken, advocate of social justice and anti-imperialism, and mainly, used, standing up for people in international courts, for figures around the world who'd been targeted by the U.S. government and their allies. He was the lawyer representing Slobodan Milosevic in The Hague. He was Saddam Hussein's lawyer, and he made clear that trial, they had for Saddam Hussein, the way that trial was conducted was designed to just, incite ethnic hatred in the country, he made, there's a beautiful statement he gave at Saddam Hussein's opening of his trial. He said, if this is not a fair trial and it's not perceived as a fair trial, Iraq is going to be divided. And he was right. They didn't give Saddam Hussein a fair trial. They gave him basically an ethnic, where we're trying to incite Sunnis and Shias against each other. And it worked. And he was there saying, no, if you want Iraq to have a peaceful future, you need to have a fair trial for this former leader. But just a very bold individual. So I worked at the International Action Center for the former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark. And that was quite an honor to be able to work with him. And, I come out of an activist background. I started working with Press TV, the TV network from Iran. I started doing reporting for them. I was part of Occupy Wall Street and was doing a lot of interviews during Occupy Wall Street on RT, on Press TV, on Turkish television, other networks. And so I started reporting for Press TV. And then I ended up at RT. But in the 2016 elections, I was very frustrated because I'm a leftist. I'm a socialist. I'm an anti-imperialist. I'm very opposed to racism, police brutality. I very much draw inspiration from Marxism and socialism, et cetera. But at the same time, Hillary Clinton was just so awful in so many ways. I mean, I could never have voted for Hillary Clinton. And at the same time, I couldn't have voted for Trump because of all the awful things he said about immigrants and the Muslim community. But at the same time, when Trump talked about international issues, I was with him. And when he talked about the need to stop meddling in Syria, I was with him on that. And, when he talked about how getting along with Russia might be a good thing, I was with him on that. And when he talked about communities in the United States that have been abandoned by these trade deals and how the working families have been left behind, and there are these big international bankers and corporations that have just gone after, kind of abandoned the American dream and left working families behind. I thought that was very good. So it was like I didn't have a political home. And my former comrades on the left, all they were doing was protesting Donald Trump and calling him a fascist. And, I'm from a small town in Ohio, very conservative, but, a lot of people from my hometown were big supporters of Donald Trump and they thought he was great. And the reasons they were supporting Trump were not all bad. They had finally waken up and realized these wars are not good. They realized that, the big corporations and the government has all the power, but because the left just wanted to cancel them and just wanted to call them racist and all of that, they saw Donald Trump as the place to go to oppose the establishment. And that said to me that there needs to be more nuance in politics. And we need to find a way that socialism and working class power and anti-racism can reach the broad masses of Americans, and that this kind of cancel culture wokeness is really a dead end, because at the end of the day, it's not a way to build unity and win people over. It's just about kind of making, people that might be left wing foot soldiers for Hillary Clinton. So that got me thinking that because I had this unique understanding of politics, I was going to start talking a little bit differently. And I started saying, you know what, I'm a patriot. I love my country. Now, I don't, support the wars, and I don't support blind obedience for the government or whatever, but I think socialism will make a better country for the United States. And on top of that, imperialism and this global financial system that we wage wars on behalf of is bad for America. It's bad for communities throughout this country. And that, so I said, we need to be patriotic. And we need to stop being hostile to people of religious faith. And we need to change the messaging style. And I used the slogan, out of the movement to the masses. out of the movement to the masses, because the left is kind of this isolated fringe of very extreme people, they call the movement, but the masses, the broad masses of Americans are angry. They're against the establishment. They're ready to hear this. So I started saying out of the movement to the masses. Some friends of mine actually started a club called Students and Youth for a New America. And they were just here in New York City. And then there was one in Illinois, and there was one in some other states, DC area, Students and Youth for a New America. And I gave them classes on Marxism and socialism. These were young people that were like campaigning for Bernie Sanders and such. And I was giving them, kind of political education and such. And one of them actually got to go on the Tucker Carlson show, which was very cool. We got an invitation to go on Tucker Carlson. So my good friend Dakota, he appeared prime time on Tucker Carlson's show, talk about Venezuela. And he just completely, Tucker Carlson didn't see it coming, because he was expecting some hippy dippy, give peace a chance leftist. And he said, no, these opposition forces in Venezuela are stringing wires across intersections and beheading cops on motorcycles. And these are terrorists. And we wouldn't allow people, treating our own police officers that way. And Tucker Carlson's audience and Tucker Carlson were just kind of blown away, because he was making arguments that didn't fit that left-right paradigm. He was explaining why people in Venezuela might not appreciate the USA arming these extremists that are trying to tear down their government. So that was a big moment. And then we started sending delegations to Venezuela. We sent a delegation to East Ukraine. Someone associated with our organization actually went to the People's Republic of Donetsk and was invited. So we got to go on a delegation there. And that, communists around the world started listening to us, and they said, wow, these are American communists who kind of get it. They're not part of this hippie counterculture left. They're leftists who actually get what this is about. They're changing their messaging style. And so then I actually went out to Los Angeles. I'd started doing the YouTube broadcast where I just talk, I do those YouTube broadcasts that are quite popular. And so I was doing that for a while. It was just a way to kind of give my opinion about politics, build my social media. And so then I was visiting a friend in Los Angeles. And so, a good friend of mine, Ramiro Funes, and, he's got a podcast called Unmasking Imperialism. You should go check it out. It's great stuff. And so I was visiting him out in LA, and I thought, why don't we have an event, in LA? So we rented like a little auditorium, and we had a very small event. Not many people came, 10, 15 people there. But one of the people there was a good, someone who became friends with me later. And he said, Caleb, what do you want to do about it? You're always on here. You got this critique of the left. You got this message. But what are you actually going to do about it? And I said, well, why don't we form a think tank? And he said, I like that idea. And this person threw themselves all in, and one thing led to another. And then, we had our first major public meetup right as the pandemic was beginning. We had a meetup in Saxton, Pennsylvania. It was after, things had been lifted to the point that you could have a small gathering. Everyone was vaccinated and such. And then we had another meetup in Los Angeles. And now we just had our first public conference in Austin, Texas. And again, very different aesthetic, but very different messaging style. But a lot of people have said to me, this is what many people are hungry for. Many people look at the left and the cancel culture and all of that. They don't like it. Many people see the right and they see the anti-immigrant bigotry and hatred for Muslims and this kind of blind support for the cops and denying, Black Lives Matter and police brutality. And they don't like that, but they hear your message and they like it. It reminds me of what Max Blumenthal recently said about how he's kind of missing a political home. He was just Max Blumenthal and Jackson Hinkle and some others. They were just protesting against the mandates. They had this day to defeat the mandates. And I'm against the mandates. I'm fully vaccinated, but I also don't think the mandates are a good idea. Why are we telling our most trusted and important public service people that they have to get vaccinated? And why is, I am not a biologist. I'm not a medical person, but why are we not allowed to have a frank debate about, different topics, related to vaccines and stuff?
Remember what Matt Taibbi just said about that. He said, it was actually a few weeks ago. He said, we're not allowed to have the discussion anymore about anything, but he meant that just in general. That's what it feels like. We're just not allowed to have the discussion. So
right. And
mainstream media. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, based on that, I think that we should be having the discussion, and I'm glad to push the envelope. And, I'm very passionate about international issues. And I see the way this Ukraine stuff is being portrayed, and you and I know what's really going on there, but people live in this fantasy world, and it's just lie after lie after lie. And it's funny. I tell people, it's like, at this point, the US media has just lied so many times, right? Just so many times, right? I mean, the biolabs are real. Hunter Biden's laptop is real. right?
Right.
There's all these massacres they've accused Russia of that Russia didn't actually do. If you look into the facts, there's all these heroic stories out of Ukraine, the heroes of Ghost Snake Island and the ghost of Kharkov and all this stuff. It just turns out to be fake. U.S. media has lied over and over again. And why do they get away with it? Because whatever they say doesn't get questioned. And if you get questioned, they just say, "Oh, you're working for Russia," and they try to shut you up. Meanwhile, Russia has come forward and said things, and they have turned out to be true, like the biolabs, like Hunter Biden's laptop. And every time Russia says anything, everyone just shouts, "Oh, you can't believe that. It's Russia, conspiracy theories." So they bend over backwards to prove everything that they're saying. So at this point, you just have to look at the track record. Should you believe the US State Department or should you believe Russia? Well, just based on what is in front of your eyes, you should believe Russia. I mean, it's just kind of common sense at this point, right? When one person is constantly being accused of lying, so they bend over backwards to prove everything they say, it's much more likely that they're telling the truth than someone who has lied over and over and over again and just gets away with it.
With purpose.
Yeah.
I mean, because they want to fund this proxy war against Russia via Ukraine, and it's so ugly. I mean, you and I both saw this coming a mile away when America canceled the peace talks that week. When Blinken came out and said there was absolutely nothing when they were, trying to negotiate that would work. I don't know. It was like they were pushing. And then all of a sudden Nord Stream 2 didn't happen, and it was supposed to happen. And I think the timing all had to do with that, but that's my opinion.
Yeah.
With the amp up of the US part is what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, Zbigniew Brzezinski is dead. Now his daughter's on Morning Joe. But I just keep seeing Zbigniew Brzezinski all over this. I know that Obama came out of the Anti-Communist Study Center International School at Columbia University. And I know that, the Biden administration is full of people from that kind of liberal imperialist soft power manipulation school. I keep thinking back to the 1980 election because, in 1980, you had the Iran hostage crisis was going on. You had the U.S. economy was falling apart. And Jimmy Carter, he was a woke president. He was supposed to be a leftist, right? I mean, he was, he had the women's conference and, he was the first president. He met with LGBT activists and he was all about, global warming. He published the Global 2000 report, which was arguing there are too many people in the world and we're using our resources. So this was like the first woke White House, right? We'd had left-wing presidents before. This was after the new left of the 1960s. And he was in there and he was presiding over the U.S. economy crashing and burning. He started, the war in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union. He started the war in Nicaragua against the Sandinistas, and he's making Iran mad by hosting the Shah. And the U.S. economy is like crashing and burning at that point. Then he gets on TV and he says, you ought to wear a sweater instead of turning up the heat. And, owning things isn't going to give you happiness. And he gives everyone, as the country's getting poorer and people are losing their jobs, he's giving them a lecture about not being greedy and materialist. And a lot of Americans have just had it. So Ronald Reagan shows up, and Ronald Reagan was an awful president in many, many ways. But if you look at that one debate they had, the messaging that Reagan brought was very strategic. He comes in there and he says, "Are you any better off than you were 4 years ago? And do you really think that you are too comfortable? You have it too good. You deserve to be poor." The messaging style was very, very effective. And Ronald Reagan came in there and just destroyed Jimmy Carter. Because Jimmy Carter, he came from that very much that big oil Eastern establishment, Zbigniew Brzezinski strategy that kind of leads to the economic ruin of the United States, but also escalates international tensions and tries to kind of make the United States look weaker while enabling the United States to manipulate international events much more effectively. But it devastates the American working class. And so the so-called Reagan Revolution, which led to a lot of awful things like increasing Pentagon spending and hurting the labor unions, et cetera. But the psychology behind it was really tapping into middle America's rejection of this kind of idea that they should be poorer, that they should feel ashamed of themselves, that they are the problem. Right. Yeah, I think among the Eastern establishment, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the DuPonts, the ultra rich oil monopolists, the old money in the United States, there really just is hatred for middle America. They hate middle America. They hate the working families of Iowa and Ohio and Kansas, and they hate middle America. And they really do. And I think a lot of Americans know that. And that divide, in our time, I mean, they say first time is tragedy, second time is farce. We'll see how things play out for Joe Biden.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, he's been trying to cover up the inflation by calling it Putin's price. I can't even remember, but it's so silly. And and we were talking about the inflation problem a month before the war in Ukraine. So I mean, like, the Biden administration is using the excuse of this proxy war to take everything off of the domestic agenda they were supposed to get done. They have gotten nothing done. And the fall, midterms, people are going to go and they're going to vote against all the Democrats are going to throw. It's almost like they're doing it purposefully. They're just not even trying. Because when you look at the base of the Democratic Party, they're ignoring 25% approximately of the left base. So when it comes to ideas about economic help for Americans, like, Medicare for all, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And, a higher minimum wage. So these agendas are just being ignored by the establishment Democrats.
Yeah, and even AOC, has recently brought that up, I saw, which I was a little bit surprised. But, I guess her job is to kind of get the base excited and get people excited about these kind of things. And they're just failing so miserably to do that, that even AOC, who has been such a shill, been such a disappointment. But I tell people, I didn't want AOC to be bad. I met AOC at a reception, before she was the nominee, when she was just kind of running for the Democratic nomination. And she seemed like a very nice person. And I remember what she said to me is, I was introduced to her. There was like a professor, was one of her former professors who was kind of like working with her. He brought me over to AOC. And this was before she was a household name, before she was anything, she had just announced she was running. And so, I was introduced to her and I said, well, I work for RT. And she said, oh, I love Lee Camp. I remember that. She's like, I love Lee Camp. That's like the first thing that came to her mind, which is funny. Lee Camp was just on your show right before me. So there you go. She said, I love Lee Camp. And then she said, do you want to take a picture with me? And I said, I don't think that would be good for your campaign to be photographed with some guy who works for Russian media. And she's like, oh, okay. Maybe not, and it was kind of funny like that. And then the crazy thing is we're actually photographed together anyway, because one of the photos that night of while she was speaking at the kind of the reception, I'm photographed sitting behind her. So you should know that AOC is a Nazbol. Cancel AOC as a Nazbol and a Russian puppet, because I was in the same room as her on that night. But it's funny, but I wanted to like AOC. She seemed like a very genuine person. And, she said a lot of things that I care a lot about opposing the prison industrial complex and fighting for working people. And I didn't want to be one of those who just immediately jumped on oh, she sucks, she's awful. I tried. I really tried to say, AOC, I went to a few of her town halls and just listened, didn't get up and heckle her or anything, just listened carefully to what she had to say. And I really wanted her to be better. And that's the correct attitude. We need to not get into this. There's a lot of people on the internet that I think they don't want anything to get better. They want everything to be a con and a shill, and they just want to get on the internet and be right. That's not the approach we're going to win with. But that said, AOC is a disappointment. Now we find out she worked for Teddy Kennedy before this. She comes out of international relations. She's not an activist. She's not a Marxist. She's somebody who comes from the foreign policy CIA. That's where she comes from. Okay, so we know that she was a plant from the beginning. And, but she was a response to the fact that younger Democrats have more left-wing values, right? That's true. And, whatever. That's what she's turned out to be. But I wanted to give her a chance. And I don't want people to take from AOC, being the disappointment that she is, that we should just immediately dismiss anybody. Because I've seen people get better. I've seen people get better over the years. There's been a lot of people who, when they first get into office, they are pretty, right-wing and middle of the road. But then events develop and the working class movement gets going, and they suddenly find themselves on the side of the working class. Historically, one of the politicians here in New York City who's a great example of that is Vito Marcantonio. You ever heard of him?
No.
Okay. No. He was an Italian Republican from Harlem. He was a Republican in the House of Representatives in Harlem. Conservative Republican, represented Harlem in the House of Representatives, Italian American. But then when the labor movement got going and the communists were building the unemployed councils and all of that, he left the Republican Party and joined the American Labor Party. And he basically was a communist. He read from the Daily Worker into the Congressional Record. He went and I think he met with Stalin, and he became a full-on revolutionary. And actually, he was removed. They removed him from Congress during the McCarthy period, right? He was kind of moved out of Congress.
Yes.
Yeah. So
now I know who you're. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, that shows that somebody can be, somebody can change, right? Based on the conditions. The Great Depression and everything pushed him into a situation. He was an anti-fascist, and being an Italian American, that was very important to be anti-fascist, as there was a lot of Mussolini influence among Italian Americans in the United States. And he was definitely not a Mussolini supporter, and he ended up becoming more or less a communist. Now, that's pretty cool, right? And if people had just dismissed him, if the communists in New York City and leftists and radicals had just said, oh, Vito Marcantonio, he's just a Republican, he's a conservative, they had not thought about how can we influence him, how can we bring him to the left, that never would have happened. And he was the one who put up, they finally passed, did you hear they finally passed the anti-lynching bill? Joe Biden's making a big show of passing the anti-lynching bill. Right. Well, he was the one who wrote it. It was Vito Marcantonio was the guy who originally wrote it and put it up, over and over and over again. It was pushing Roosevelt to take action against lynching and Jim Crow, because that was something he could do. And he represented Harlem, where there were a lot of black voters and such. So there you go.
It's amazing. I always learn so much when I talk to you. You really have a great grasp of history, and it's so cool. And I even watched some of the videos that you were talking about before, of some of the education that you've done. That professor part of you, I will say.
Oh, thank you.
So, yeah. So hey, Reef, I know we were getting some chats. So do you want to read any of them? Are we? Okay. Oh, okay. Is there any super chats or anything you want to read, or no? Okay. Yeah, thank you, Gabby. All right. Okay. And thank you to Oz and Indy. Yeah, all you guys. Yeah. And INN. So cool. All right. Well, that sounds good. So Caleb, if people want to get a hold of you, find you, talk to you, how can they do that?
Oh, well, I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I'm also on Rockfin. I know we're on Rockfin right now, right?
Yeah,
because that's the place to be. Rockfin is the place to be for sure. That's a great app. I'm on Rockfin and I stream on Rockfin. I don't know how much longer my YouTube channel is going to last, but I'm going to fight, tooth and nail I'm not going off YouTube until they push me off, and I'm not going off Facebook until they push me off. Same with Twitter. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to abandon, these platforms. I'm going to stick to my guns, because this is where the audience is, right? And that's why they're purging it, is because that's where the audience is. So I'm going to stick to my guns and stay on these platforms, but I am prepared for the day that they come and just boot me off with no notice or anything. And I'm going to keep going, because
they did that to Nita Broderick yesterday. She's permanently banned. So
why? I mean,
she had 500,000 followers. I mean, she had I liked looking at Juanita's all of her tweets. Some of them were not something she and I are different politically, but she is very brave how she came forward about Bill Clinton and what happened. And, it was quite a story historically, how it's even in the record of what he did. So to her, and got away with it. And she was on my show a few months ago, and she's just very lovely and very direct. And we were able to kind of navigate our politics, because they're very different, and be very respectful and have a good time and a kind of a nice debate, right?
Sure.
So it's just so bummed. And she, by the way, she got banned, not for threatening, not for swearing, not for anything like that. It was, she said something about COVID. And it's like you say the word, and it's like what Matt Taibbi said, like I said earlier, we can't even have the discussion. We're not allowed.
Right. I mean, and I really don't know enough about biology. And I know if I make the slightest mistake in how I talk about something, they'll have that on me immediately.
And they'll knock down my YouTube channel. I'll be like, thanks, Caleb.
Right. And the thing is, I do pick some, they say pick the hill you want to die on. I have picked some very controversial hills to die on. And that's not one of them I'm ready to die on yet. But I will die on the fact that people have the right to debate it, and that people have the right to question it. And that I do oppose these mandates, COVID is real. I had it at one point. Vaccines are real. I got vaccinated. I'm not dead. And I don't know anyone who's suffered as a result of their vaccine. But at the same time, we should be allowed to debate these things. We should be allowed to discuss these things. And it's really disturbing that trust big pharma is the mantra of so-called leftists, right?
Yeah.
There is a problem, put COVID aside right now.
Sold. They're bought and sold, Caleb. I mean, if we could just have our representatives stand up right now with the corporations that are supporting them. A lot of the Democrats, it would be Pfizer and Moderna. So of course, like if they're making almost $1 trillion off the pandemic collectively, these pharmaceutical companies, of course, people want to ask questions, especially when they pass a law that we can't sue them if there's something wrong. Remember, Pfizer did that. You can't sue Pfizer. Yeah. So,
well, I
mean, and it's not saying it's necessarily nefarious or, there's any conspiracy around it, but let's look at the facts. There's a lot of profit being made off of a very preventable, illness. It can't be that difficult. So I don't know. Anyway.
Well, I want to, putting COVID aside, the fact that so many children are put on medications now, right? If a kid is misbehaving in school or or is having some difficulty in their family or whatever, they just give medications, they mandate, they force parents to put these kids on medications. I'm from a small town in Ohio, and actually, in my little town, we actually had corporal punishment in school where the teachers you could get sent to the principal and they could like spank you or whatever. They don't do that in a lot of places anymore. But now, when they're putting all these kids on drugs that they'll be on for the rest of their life, they become almost chemically dependent on these drugs. Is that healthier than striking them? That can do long-term damage, and we don't know what the long-term effects will be. And a lot of these drugs they put kids on, they gain huge amounts of weight. It's awful. And
it causes, I think too, we don't know the long-term causes of a lot of those medications when they become adults, like how will that affect them? And there's not been enough studies done. I've always been very cautious about, with my daughter's grown now, but where there were vaccines, the new one was the chickenpox vaccine. And they wanted everyone to try it. Well, it ended up not working. So, to an extent, and having allergic reactions. But I believe there are some vaccines that are obviously that we need, but it's okay to question what's in them, who's making them, and if there's side effects, and then why those are. Those are normal.
Of course.
Normal.
Again.
Yeah.
Right. And I just, and often I feel like in a lot of these cases when kids are put on medications, there's some other problem. Right. Not every problem is a chemical imbalance. Not every problem is, in some cases, I think there may be an issue in the family. There may be, maybe the parents are not relating to them in the correct way emotionally. Maybe the school environment, there's the getting rid of recess and, kids, especially little boys, are full of energy and stuff. And, I think that there's more to it. And this idea that we can solve everything by giving everyone a vaccination or everyone a pill. There's a lot of money to be made in that, and asking some serious questions about it is a legit thing to do. And especially with mental health, not all of mental health is biochemical. Some of it is emotional. Some of it is interpersonal. We obviously, when we have a society, I think it's like 1 in 5 adults is on antidepressants at this point. 1 in 5. That's not, that seems like we have a societal problem.
Caleb, I think it's even higher. The US has the highest amount of depression cases in the world or something like that, or depression meds that are, whatever. And I think that goes back to your original, when we were first talking about this, about our culture, just the whole culture is just changing. It's just gotten, I think, reactive to the technology that we have now. It's like we emotionally don't have the intelligence yet wrapped around the technology that we have, if that makes sense.
Sure. It's quite disturbing. And, I think about Frankenstein. You ever read, the classic Mary Shelley, or the first work of science? Yeah. And it's like, she's using this story as kind of an analogy for the Industrial Revolution, right? Because it's like someone makes this great technological scientific leap. They make a person, out of body parts and bring them to life with electricity. And they're doing something that's never been done. But in the process, they don't give this person they created what a person needs: love, affection, care, right? And so it creates this monstrosity that is attack on society. And Mary Shelley was largely using that for an analysis of the Industrial Revolution and how all these great technological leaps were being made, steam engines, all these things were coming in. But at the same time, we were losing some of our humanity, right? That the relations between people were being viewed as mere financial calculations, and what was going on in the sweatshops and what was going on in the mills and in Britain. And I mean, it was just horrendous what she was observing at the time. And in this brave new world that capitalism had brought into being, while it was much more advanced scientifically, we had lost some of our soul. And I think that was what she was trying to articulate. And you could argue we're experiencing something similar now, whereas, yes, we're doing, this is amazing. Here, we're on one side of the country, you're on another. We're broadcasting. People all over the world are probably watching this. But at the same time, we have a society where people go crazy and shoot up the subway on a Tuesday morning. I mean, and we're having a big, we got our politicians trying to turn Ukraine into a big battlefield just because they want the oil prices to go up. We've come a long way, but we've also lost some of our basic love and humanity. And this is kind of the contradiction of our modern society in a lot of ways.
That's really eloquently put. That's really well put. Yeah, I agree. Totally. Go on.
Oh, I mean, I was also thinking about, the old, the book of Genesis and Adam and Eve, right? It's like, the knowledge of good and evil, right? It's like, the idea is that human beings gained this ability to know what was good and evil, but we didn't have the capacity to do with that knowledge, right? That's kind of the idea, right? Is that, we could be innocent, just in the garden doing our own thing or whatever, but then, we gain this ability, this intellect, right? But at the same time, we don't seem to have the moral fiber and capacity to use that intellect for good, right? And that's kind of the contradiction of the human race. We're above animals, but we're not gods. You know what I mean? We have the ability. I always tell people, ants have been making their ant farms the same way for thousands of years. Beavers have been making their beaver dams the same way for thousands of years. But in just 5,000-6,000 years, human beings have gone from hunter-gatherers in the woods to space travel and iPhones. We have done amazing things, but yet at the same time, while we have this amazing capacity to reinvent our relationship with our environment, to force the environment to serve us, we have an amazing capacity to do things, an amazing creative capacity. We kind of lack, the morality to use that creative capacity in a way that could build a just society. And this is kind of the contradictory nature of human beings. On the one hand, we got one foot in the animal kingdom and one foot in divinity, and we don't quite know what we are. And then that is kind of what defines us. We're somewhere caught in between. And I think that's the contradiction of human existence.
Yeah, exactly. It's beautifully put. It's true. And it'll be interesting to see, because now we're on the verge of artificial intelligence, and that's going to lead to some spiritual and moral and intellectual grappling, isn't it?
Sure.
Because I think we're headed there more quickly than we're ready for some of those moral decisions. I don't think we're there yet. I think there's a different kind of way to look at everything once you make that leap to artificial intelligence, to when it's fully developed. But there's companies all over the world working really hard on that right now. So, and that will change workers, won't it?
Sure. Well, I mean, I saw Jack Ma speak at the Valdi Discussion Club when I was in Russia. That's where I met George Galloway in person for the first time, was at Valdi Discussion Club. And I got to see Jack Ma, the CEO of Alibaba, speak. And he gave a very eloquent speech about artificial intelligence and technological optimism. And he says we're going to have to change our education system. We're going to have to change everything, because pretty soon the only thing human beings are going to have that a machine can't do is their humanity. Right? Because pretty soon a machine is going to be able to do everything non-human, everything animalistic. And so much of our whole system is training people to be like machines, right? To function like a machine. And we got machines to do that now. And machines can do everything machines can do. The only thing that humans are going to have is their soul, is their artistic creativity, their compassion, their emotions. And these things are going to become much more important, right? And with social media, right? Right now we're generating revenue. This is on Twitter, this is on Rockfin, this is on YouTube. Social media companies are making money. You and I, we would do this if we didn't have to, right? We're just having fun, right? We're just two friends on here chatting, but we're making money we're creating value for a corporation, right? That's a new thing, right? We're not in a factory selling our labor power. We're creating value by enjoying ourselves, right? And that this is starting to be the beginning of a shift in how human relations work. That on the one hand, it gives me optimism, but at the same time, even though we're doing this, even though we're creating value by doing something we would probably do anyway without people watching and just have a nice chat, even though we're doing this and creating value, the value, most of it is going to go to the private corporation, right? I mean, we're going to get, hopefully, with the ad revenue or whatever, we'll get something, but at the end of the day, it's a corporation that's privately accumulating the profit of the value that we're creating here. Right. So you can still see what Karl Marx is writing about, exploitation, working. You can see it, but it's a little bit different because we're doing something we're enjoying. We're not alienated from this process. This is not alienated labor. This is the opposite of alienation. This is, people enjoying themselves. And we're almost back to what those craftsmen, those basket weavers that put a little bit of their soul into every basket they made. And those potters who put a little bit of their own touch on the pot. We're kind of back to that. Social media is this huge source generating value and wealth. Where people can kind of bring their soul out. They're not alienated from their labor. So it's very interesting to think about. You talked about how you got in trouble for reading Karl Marx back in the day when you were growing up. And so I'm thinking about the manuscripts of 1848, the 1848 philosophical manuscripts where he talks about, when a worker is at home, he is not at work. And when he's at work, he's not at home. And that whole, when he's getting into kind of the spiritual side of capitalism and how it kind of breaks things down. I'm thinking about how all of that, what would Marx say if he were alive today and saw, artificial intelligence and social media, I don't think he would be rethinking things, though, because his basic overall thesis that the capitalist is constantly trying to replace workers with machines and reduce the role of the worker in production will ultimately lead to millions being outcast and starving amid the wonders they have made, mass unemployment and a reserve army of labor, until finally those outcast people that have no place at the assembly line come together and say, we're going to take control of those factories and those banks and those means of production and make them serve all of society, not just a wealthy group of private owners, right? That's how this ultimately ends up. I think Marx would stick to that. I think that's ultimately proving to be more correct than ever before. And that I don't think he ever thought it would get this far. I think he thought this would happen a long time ago. And I mean, if he knew about artificial intelligence and 3D printers and all the, how we got machines that can play chess better than people, he'd say it's about time. Workers of the world unite. You've got nothing to lose but your chains and a whole wide world to win. And then what he wrote about in that very important pamphlet, The Critique of the Goethe Program, where he talked about how the ultimate goal is a society where labor becomes life's prime want and no longer a necessity, where people work because they feel like doing it, where there's no division between mental and physical labor, where all of the artificial restraints on production have broken down. Only then can the narrow horizon of bourgeois right be crossed in its entirety and society inscribe upon its banners, from each according to his own ability to each according to his needs. He's talking about a high-tech utopia based on vast technological abundance, right? Where machines and technology has been unleashed to higher levels than ever before. I think he would stick by that too. What do you think?
I think you're right. I think that's an amazing way to look at it, because and I hadn't looked at it like that before. So this is a new world, that not a new world order either. You heard that this week, right? New world order. Yeah. So
that was for the conspiracy buffs. They didn't have enough to talk about. So he said,
but they actually said it out loud. That was so wild. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining me. I know it's late in your time and you've probably got to get up early and do more reporting.
Sure.
Keep us all updated on the story that you broke, that you were at the scene of, and be careful, please, as you make your commutes.
All right.
Thanks for coming out. Thank you so much. We got a lot of comments. We'll have to go check them out later. So.
All right. Very good. Talk to you soon. Yeah.
Thank you. Take care, Caleb. Good night.
Good night.